So today we're going to be talking about defense of abortion, Judith Jarvis Thomson's article. And I thought it would be nice to have the rose garden as a background, but unfortunately it looks like during the winter the rose garden is pruned, and so currently it's very barren right behind me right now. But maybe that's more appropriate anyway. So today we're going to be going over Judith Jarvis Thomson's article, A Defense of Abortion. So the opponents to abortion generally rely on the premise that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception. But Thomson's going to say that this isn't a very well-argued, premise, well-supported or well-reasoned. So the argument is going to rely on this idea that, since there's not a non-arbitrary point on the continuum of the development of a human between a fetus and an adult, that to draw a line would just be arbitrary, because there is no clear demarcation and distinction, and since there is no clear demarcation and distinction, the fetus is a full person. So this is the argument we looked at last time, and Thomson's going to say, okay, well, the same thing can be said about acorns and oak trees. There's no clear demarcation between an acorn and an oak tree, and so we could say the same thing about that, but it doesn't really seem to follow that all acorns are oak trees. Like, acorns, not all acorns grow into oak trees. Some of them die, some of them are eaten, and so on and so forth. So, she's going to say these are bad arguments. She thinks that they commit the fallacy of the slippery slope. You might think they commit another fallacy, but they at least maybe commit this the slippery slope fallacy. And again, we went over that before, but the idea is that just because this over here has this problem and these ones are connected, the problem is gonna slide all the way down here. So, to avoid that, we're just gonna not allow it here. So yeah, those are slippery slope, and that's a very brief explanation of slippery slope arguments. So yeah, she says that I thought this was funny. She's disappointed in her philosophic opponents. She doesn't seem to be taking this abortion debate as personally as some other people. So, she's just disappointed that her opponents are not taking this, point very critically. Nonetheless, they do seem to be a little bit correct here. They are right. It is hard to draw a line, especially one that's going to be non-arbitrary, one that's going to be justifiable for some reasons. And she's inclined to agree that the fetus is already, a human well before birth. But on the other hand, a fetus at the moment of conception doesn't really sit well with her. She says, a newly fertilized ovum, a newly implanted clump of cells is no more a person than an acorn is an oak tree. Which, seems right. So she wonders, what if, for argument's sake, here comes a big truck. But she's going to say, so they're relying on this premise that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception. And it's not very well reasoned, it's not very well argued, but let's just grant it for him anyway. So she's gonna, for argument's sake, she's gonna, assume that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception. And she's wondering, how does that still get us to abortion is gonna be immoral? Like, how does it get us to that conclusion? So, everyone's so concerned with just establishing this premise that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception, that they tend to, not articulate the reasoning from there to the impermissibility of abortion. And she says, okay, maybe it's supposed to be obvious, or, maybe they're just being brief. So in this paper, she's going to try and flesh out what is that reasoning from this, a fetus is a person to the impermissibility of abortion. But on the other hand, she's also going to say that the arbitrariness of a fetus not being a person and then all of a sudden becoming a person at birth seems unpalatable as well. So she's trying to find this middle ground between these two sides. We talked about this as the moderate view. So there were other moderate views. There was the moderate view that fetal personhood is something that grows over time, but then there's also this is a slightly different moderate approach, where she's not even approaching it necessarily engaging with that idea of fetal personhood. She's going to say, look, we're granting it for argument's sake, and she's still going to show that some abortions are supposed to be permissible. granting for argument's sake that, the fetus is a person from the moment of conception, let's grant that as premise 1. Premise 2 is going to be every person has a right to life. Okay, so then we get the conclusion, so the fetus, being a person, also has the same right to life. Now, she's going to say this next premise is pretty uncontroversial. Most people would accept this, that the mother has a right to decide what shall happen in and to her body. Now we get this next premise here, that a person's right to life is stronger or more stringent than the mother's right to decide what happens to and in her body. So the fetus's right to life outweighs the mother's autonomy. And we get our final conclusion here, that the fetus may not be killed, or in other words, abortion is immoral. So this argument might sound plausible, but now she's going to give us this example, and we're supposed to, keep this argument in mind as we, consider the violinist example. We went over this last time too, but let's, consider it again. You're going to wake up in a hospital bed, back to back with an unconscious violinist. This again is supposed to be like this famous violinist. He's found to have a kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers canvassed all the available medical records, and they found out that you and you alone can help. So they've kidnapped you, and last night they hooked you up to the violinist's circulatory system, and they plugged you in so that way your kidneys could extract the poison from his blood and yours. The director of the hospital, now tells you, look, we're really sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this, but, we never would have let it happen if we had known, but you know what, they did it. And the violinist is plugged into you now, and unplugging him would be to kill him. But never mind, it's just for 9 months. By then, he'll have recovered from his ailment, and you can be safe and unplugged from him then. So, you need to, when you're thinking about this case, you need to remember that all persons have a right to life, and the violinist is clearly a person. And also that you have a right to decide what happens in and to your body. But the person's right to life is going to outweigh your autonomy, and so you're supposed to be obligated to stay plugged into the violinist. This is supposed to sound outrageous, and I think most people are going to object to, premise FP4 here, the idea that someone else's right to life is going to outweigh your bodily autonomy. So, critics of this argument might say, of course, in the violinist example, you were kidnapped, so this is only going to be analogous in instances of rape. And so, the person who would say that, they're, going to say that, look, abortion is going to be morally permissible in cases of rape. But to say that is to say something analogous along the lines of like, okay, well then the fetus doesn't have a right to life in instances when it came into existence as a result of rape. But that sounds really, sketchy. Like a right to life is not something that should be like conditional upon how it came into existence. A right to life is something you either do have or you don't have. It's not, oh, your parents didn't have, consent in the right way, and so this, you don't have a right to life now. If that fetus was brought to term, it would clearly have a right to life. Like this is absurd to think that it doesn't have a right to life. So people who make the FPA argument, so the fetal person argument, might not make exceptions for cases of rape, nor would they, make an exception if the mother had to spend, the next 9 months in bed. So they're going to be really principled here. People who are going to make this, fetal person argument, to reach this conclusion, they're going to have to be extremely principled. So no matter what reason a mother might have for getting an abortion, it's never going to be morally permissible. So cases of rape, cases where the mother has to be bedridden for 9 months. So my mom was bedridden for 9 months, and so I'm very grateful that she, stuck with it. Thank you, Mom. So then, they're going to be really principled. So what about, if the fetus is, actually going to kill the mother? We know that if she brought the baby to term, she would lose her own life. These are going to be like extreme views. Not a lot of people are going to hold this extreme view that abortions are even going to be impermissible in those situations. But nonetheless, this is going to be like our starting point. We're going to use this as an anchoring point, the extreme view. The extreme view is going to be the view that abortion is going to be impermissible even in situations to save the mother's life. The extreme view is only going to really come out of the FPA argument when we add some premises. But first, let's think about what's the kind of situation this is. So suppose that a woman gets pregnant, intentionally, she's married, she's all fine, she thought she was healthy, and then she finds out during her pregnancy that she has a cardiac condition, and she can't carry the baby to term. If she does, then she'll die from this cardiac condition. So what is she morally permitted to do in these situations? You know, the fetus and the mother both have a right to life. What are we supposed to do? Flip a coin? Like, how are we supposed to choose? Maybe we could add, you know, the mother's, you know, autonomy together with her right to life is going to outweigh the fetus's right to life. Okay, so now let's go back to the fetal person argument. Let's think about, you know, adding some premises in order to make sense of this. So we also need to think about the distinction between actively killing someone and letting someone die. So there's a difference between, you know, pulling the plug, or like, you know, giving someone some medicine. This is going to be what we talk about in euthanasia. But there's a difference between like killing someone by giving them medicine that you know is going to hurt them, as opposed to, you know, stopping treatment, which you know is also going to end to the end of their life, but it's natural causes causing that. So with this distinction in mind, now let's think about the premises we might add to FPA to get, you know, to justify this extreme view. As directly killing an innocent person is always and absolutely impermissible, an abortion may not be performed. The direct killing of an innocent person is murder, and murder is always and absolutely impermissible. An abortion may not be performed. As one's duty to refrain from directly killing an innocent person is more stringent than one's duty to keep a person from dying, an abortion may not be performed. If one's only option is directly killing an innocent person or letting another person die, one must prefer letting the person die. Thus, an abortion may not be performed. Some might not have stated these premises explicitly in their formulation of the fetal person argument because they seem implicit in the fact that an innocent person has a right to life. Yet 1 through 4 are going to be false. It seems pretty absurd to think that the mother should sit around for 9 months and just wait for her death. And further on top of that, it's absurd to think that an innocent child is going to be better off living without a mother. Like, just, okay. So let's think back, to show these are false, let's think back to the violinist example. Now you have to stay plugged into the violinist, but you're also going to die at the end of the 9 months. Because directly unplugging yourself is going to be killing the violinist, and that will be murder. But letting you die now that you're already plugged in, and in this situation, that's going to be letting you die, and that's supposed to be preferable to murder, which is seemingly absurd. So, you know, we should reject this conclusion that we should let you die in this situation, that, you know, you have to die. You're morally obligated to die. Right, so she was talking about third-party consent. This isn't a really big issue today. I haven't seen anyone arguing from this perspective, but the idea is essentially like if it's not permissible for a doctor to give a patient an abortion, then it's not permissible for a woman herself to seek an abortion. So this is, you know, coming from the idea that a woman can't give herself an abortion. And this is maybe slightly outdated. I believe her article came out in '72. And the FDA approved the two-method abortion pills in 2000. So I'm not quite sure if this third-party regimening or third-party considerations are super relevant now, but, you know, still something to think about, you know, in terms of third-party moral obligations in general. So she's going to give us this expanding child example. So the idea is, I think this happens in The Impossibles, but there's an old movie called Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. And the idea, it's like the opposite of a shrink ray, it's an expanding ray. So imagine like a kid accidentally gets hit with this expanding ray, and it's expanding, and it's expanding, and it's expanding, and you realize like, oh my God, it's about to suffocate me inside my own house. So, you know, if you look out the window and a third party outside, you know, they see you, they're like, okay, you know, I can't choose between you and him. There's nothing I can do to help you out. And maybe that's fine, like, you know, not a nice third party. It'd be nice if they, you know, helped me out, if they maybe opened the window or did something. But clearly the mother, the woman in the room with the expanding child, has a right to self-defense. And if the only way she has a right to defend herself is by killing the child, then, you know, maybe it's permissible in that situation. So she does think, though, that there is going to be a limit of self-defense. So let's suppose that someone threatens you, I'm going to kill you if you don't torture this other person. You don't have a right to then torture that other person just because, you know, you're trying to defend yourself. Like, so there's going to be certain limitations to this right to self-defense. But in the case of abortion, it's not going to be that complicated. It's just two people and one person is threatening another person. And so maybe it's fine for the bystander not to intervene, but it definitely seems like the person being threatened totally has a right to intervene, and they totally have a right to self-defense. So yeah, it seems clear that the woman has a right to self-defense against her own body when posed a threat by the unborn child, even if that involves death. That seems pretty clear, which is going to tell us that 1 through 4 is going to be false, which also tells us that the extreme view isn't going to be able to, argue for its conclusion here. So we could have a slightly less extreme view. Abortions are permissible in situations where it's okay to save the mother's life. But it's not like the fetus and the mother, have the same claim to her body. Clearly the mother seems to own her body. So now she's going to give us this example of Smith and Jones. So Smith and Jones are supposed to be out in the cold. It's supposed to be, very close to dying. And they both are going to need this jacket to survive. This is the only way they could possibly continue to live. But there's only one jacket between them. And Jones is currently wearing it, but Smith owns it. And so, Smith might be, or Smith owns it, Jones is wearing it, right? So Smith might be asking other people, like, hey, can you help me out? Like, that's my jacket, I need it. And people are like, hey, we want to refrain from, choosing sides here. And I get this, you understand that your choice is going to decide which one of them dies. Hey, pup. Oh. Okay, so, it makes sense how a third party doesn't want to get involved here. They don't want to have to, decide between who's going to have to die, Smith or Jones. So, they might be reluctant and, to help out, and that sucks, but it doesn't really mean that Smith can't get his own jacket back. So this analogy is supposed to show us that just because a third party doesn't want to, choose between a mother and the fetus, doesn't mean that no one can choose between the mother and the fetus. Like, someone else can, intervene and help out. Clearly the mother has a right to her body and whatnot. Sorry, that dog just ate its own poop, so it's distracting me. Yeah, so just because a third party does not want to choose between the mother and the fetus doesn't mean that no one can choose between the mother and the fetus. That no one can help the mother defend herself. Like, it clearly, someone can. Okay, so someone might claim that we're only loaned our bodies, and this is kind of a strange view to have. But maybe it is. She's going to still, nonetheless, she's acknowledging it, but she's just setting it aside. She's going to say, look, if we do have a right to own anything, it seems like we do have a right to own our bodies. And on top of that, most people within this, argument are going to grant the sake that a woman has a right to decide what happens in and to her body. So she's going to set that little view aside. So in situations where the mother's life is not at risk, the fetal person argument seems to have a stronger pull. It seems to be, maybe more convincing in that situation. The fetus's right to life outweighs most things except for the mother's own right to life. This is going to assume that the right to life is going to be clear and unproblematic. But it's like, what does it mean to have a right to life? So she's going to consider at least two ways of thinking about the right to life. So one way of some people view the right to life as including the right to be given at least the bare minimum one needs to continue to live. But this raises the question, what if what you need to continue to live is something that you don't have a right to at all? What if what I need to live is your kidney? It's I don't have a right to your kidney just because it's something that would help me live. So she gives us this Henry Fonda example. So Henry Fonda was a famous actor. This was before my time. Obviously, this came out in '73. So the modern example might be Tom Hanks or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Someone like that. Someone very famous who is busy doing other things, and doesn't know you at all, has no special obligation to you whatsoever. And let's just, so the thought experiment is supposed to be something like this, you're sick, and I don't know, somehow we know that Tom Hanks' hand on your forehead is going to, cure you of your ailment. It'd be really, really nice of him to do that, but you have absolutely no right to be given the touch of his hand. And this, just because it's something that might, prevent you from dying, it's the bare minimum that you need to continue to live, doesn't mean that you have a right to it. So this right to life, this idea of the right to life doesn't really make sense. Think about like the violinist example. So yeah, it would be nice of you, just like it would be nice of Tom Hanks to drop what he's doing, fly across the country and put his hand on your forehead. But you have no right to ask for it. You have no right to it. And in the same situation with the violinist, like it would be nice of you to stay plugged in, but he has no right to use you. And if you do unplug yourself, you have a right to do that, and you also have a right that others cannot interfere against you. Okay, so others are going to define the right to life in a slightly different way. So they're not going to think about it as something that you are given or something you have a right to. But it's more something that amounts to and only to the right not to be killed by anyone. So this means that everyone should refrain from killing you. They should refrain from killing the violinist. This includes people refraining from plugging you in. They shouldn't have plugged you into the violinist, but now you're in this situation. And it would be wrong of them to unplug you from it. Like that's one way of thinking about this right to life. And so the third party consent, or the third party's ability and the moral permissibility in that situation, it would be impermissible for them to unplug you. Again, because then they would be complicit in killing the violinist. So the violinist does not have a right against you, and you shall not let them use your kidneys. Like, you have the ability to do that. So the violinist does not have a right against you, that you shall continue to let them use their kidneys. That makes sense. So again, it would be nice of you if you did, but you don't owe him anything. You don't have to be doing this. So this is not to say that people do not have a right to life. Rather, these problems, are something that an adequate view of natural rights must address. And however it does address it, Thomson thinks that it's going to be acceptable, that an acceptable account of natural rights is going to find the statement that all persons have a right to life as true. So the right to life does not guarantee either having a right to use or continued use of someone else or their body, even if it's something that you need to continue living yourself. The right to life might also not help the fetal person argument as much as we initially thought. So we need to get a clear sense of what a right is, and when we can use these rights, how we can use these rights. To deprive someone of what they have a right to is to treat them unjustly. To make sense of this, she's going to give us the box of chocolates example. So these two brothers are given a box of chocolates, jointly given a box of chocolates. So each brother is supposed to have equal right to it, but the older brother doesn't share with the younger brother. He's now treating him unjustly because the younger brother has also been given a right to those box of chocolates. Now, consider again the violinist case. You have not given him permission to use your kidneys, so you are not treating him unjustly by unplugging yourself, even though you know that it means that he's going to die. The violinist is a full person, and it's clear that he has a right to life. And so you might think, as we were just considering, what does that right to life mean? Well, it means maybe a right not to be killed. But you are also justified in unplugging yourself, which means that you supposedly have a right to unplug yourself. So he supposedly does not have a right against you. So these rights seem to be in conflict here. His right to not be killed, if that's how we're going to understand the right to life, and also your right to unplug yourself here. Like, you're not treating him unjustly. So these two seem to be at odds with each other. But again, remember, you did not give him the right in the first place. So she's going to say that this is going to suggest that a right to life isn't a right not to be killed. A right to life is rather should be defined as a right not to be killed unjustly. So I was always taught this, especially in the Ten Commandments. There's the fourth commandment, I think, is like, thou shalt not kill. And notice that it's thou shalt not kill. Notice that it's not thou shalt not murder. Oh shoot, that's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be thou shalt not murder. So murder is supposed to be unjust killing. Killing itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. The Ten Commandments aren't ruling them out. They're saying thou shalt not murder, right? That's an unjust killing. That's a wrong killing. Killing someone in self-defense, that might not be an unjust killing. That might be a just killing. And I think that's where she's getting the same idea that she's going at for here. So again, a right to life, she's going to say, is a right not to be killed unjustly. So this understanding of the right to life is going to help us explain how the violinist's right to life is going to be compatible with the fact that you don't act unjustly towards him when you unplug yourself, thereby killing him. So if you don't kill him unjustly, then you're not violating his right to life. So you are not doing anything unjust, so you're fine to unplug. And because you're not doing that action unjustly, you're not actually violating his right to life. So he can still have a right to life, and that's fine, and we're respecting that. But you still have a right to unplug yourself. And it's because you're not killing him unjustly because you didn't give him the right to use your body in the first place. So if we accept this understanding of the right to life, then it's not clear that we're going to have enough to justify the conclusion that abortion is immoral from the fetal person argument. Showing that a fetus is a person and reminding us that all persons have a right to life is not going to be enough to show us that killing a fetus violates the fetus's right to life. Abortion is an unjust killing. So there might be circumstances in which abortion is going to be a just killing. So, pregnancy is an instance, pregnancy due to rape is an instance when it's clear that the unborn person was not given a right to use the woman's body for food and shelter. So that's an instance where abortion is going to be morally permissible because it's not an unjust killing, because the fetus didn't have a right to use the woman's body. Okay, so now let's think about what circumstances and how would a woman give an unborn person a right to use her body. It's not like unborn people are out in the world and we can just go around giving them rights. It's like we have to bring them into existence in a certain way and then give them rights. So let's think about it. Consensual normal sex. So suppose that a woman has sex and she knows that there's a chance that she could get pregnant as a result, and off chance she does get pregnant. So yes, she's clearly causally responsible for bringing that unborn person into existence. But the question is, does that causal responsibility give the unborn person the right to use her body? So if so, then an abortion in these circumstances would be more analogous to the brother in the box of chocolates. So the brother who has a right is being deprived. He's being treated unjustly. He was in this situation, the fetus might have been given the right. But it's not as analogous to the violinist case where you were kidnapped and you didn't give him the right. So abortion in these circumstances, the normal consensual sex, is not going to be justified. Others might contend that the mother is dependent, or the fetus is dependent on the mother, and this gives the mother a special kind of responsibility. Specifically the kind of responsibility that an unborn child's right against the mother. So because they're biologically related and because it's a mother-child relationship, the mother has a special responsibility to let the fetus use her body for nourishment and protection. Hence, the violinist case is not going to be analogous to cases of consensual sex. The analogy only establishes that abortion due to rape is morally permissible. It does not, in that instance, it does not amount to a justified killing, but in instances of consensual sex, it would be unjust to treat the fetus that way. Again, somehow the mother has given the fetus the rights. Now, think about it another thing, she mentions this, but doesn't really go into it, and I think it's a really interesting point. It could be its own line of argument, is now consider the woman who voluntarily brings a child into existence, but then finds out that she has a heart condition. So yes, she's clearly causally responsible, but there's something else going on in that situation. Does she still have a moral obligation to bring the baby to term, or is it all right if she were to get an abortion in that situation? But she even sets that line of arguments aside and continues on. So, you know, thinking about causal responsibilities and, you know, the special rights that they could possibly, you know, give to someone else. So think about it like this, you know, like I'm, you know, in my apartment and it's hot and stuffy, so I open the window, and a burglar gets in. And, you know, I had full knowledge that burglars would burgle, and, you know, that's a thing and it happens, and that, you know, opening a window might, you know, open myself to the burglar. Sorry, the dogs are distracting. So yes, I'm causally responsible for the burglar maybe getting in, but, you know, do I have to let him stick around? Do I have to keep letting the burglar burgle? No, it doesn't really seem like I am. So causal responsibility doesn't seem to imply this obligation here, let alone I don't have to let him stick around for 9 months. Hey, pups. So further, suppose like I put bars on my windows, I'm trying to protect myself, but you know, it's life. There's going to be defective bars and, you know, the burglar might get in anyway. In that situation, it seems like you still don't have like a moral responsibility. Like, you were trying to protect yourselves. You did what was reasonably necessary to protect yourself, and somehow the burglar still got in. Same thing is happening in, you know, situations with sex with a condom or birth control or something like that, contraceptive. Trying to, you know, you're putting bars on there knowing that there's still a risk, it's still possible. But she's going to say, look, the causal responsibility isn't going to imply this special obligation or rights to the person. So she, you know, proposes this like little out there thought experiment, but again, it's the same kind of like the causal responsibility and, you know, the moral responsibility going on here. So suppose like this is the way pregnancy is, that, you know, there are people seeds. So little seeds fly around and they grow into people when they implant on either your carpet or, you know, you have some nice velvet couch or something like that. Once the seed takes root, that's how it grows into a plant person. So, you know, same kind of situation. You open your windows knowing that these people seeds are out there, and you get the best screens you possibly can. And still, nonetheless, like, there are going to be defects. It's going to happen. Occasionally, one seed's going to slip through. And now, like, let's say one does. It takes root in your carpet. Does this, you know, person plant now have a right to develop in your house? And, you know, the intuition here is going to be like, no. Like, even though, like, you open the window, like, the cause, you have the carpets, you have the upholstery, and you knew that screens are defective sometimes. Like, she's still going to say, no, you were trying to prevent this thing from happening, and it still happened anyway. So if a woman is morally responsible in these cases, then, you know, because she didn't get a hysterectomy, then this also seems to like put moral blame on women who were, you know, victims of rape. It's like, oh, okay, you know, they also could have gotten a hysterectomy, which seems like incredibly absurd. Like, you know, women should not be responsible for getting a hysterectomy is the only way of, you know, being blameless in terms of, you know, getting pregnant and, you know, wanting to, you know, not get pregnant. Okay, so on to moral and decency. So I'm here at the Rose Garden, and it looks like dogs show up after 4 o'clock. So yeah, sorry if you're gonna hear them in the background or see them running as they go. Okay, so now we're talking about moral and decency. So she's gonna claim that there's situations where you would be morally indecent to detach yourself from the fetus. So suppose that you only needed to be attached to the violinist for like 1 more hour. Further, like, you know, supposing that your health is not gonna be affected at all. You know, yes, you were kidnapped, and yes, you did not give him your permission. Still, Thomson's going to think that you're morally obligated to stay plugged in to the violinist and let him use your kidneys. So, if pregnancy were the same way, an hour and no health risks, even in cases of rape, she's going to say it would be indecent to refuse to carry the baby to term. That is, even in cases of rape, you'd be morally obligated to carry the baby to term. So some people are going to use the word right and unjust in a looser sense. So she's going to try and, you know, get rid of these ideas as well. So think back to the box of chocolates, but now the 2 brothers aren't given the box of chocolates jointly. Instead, only the other older brother is given the box of chocolates. Now in this case, someone might tell the older brother, like, you know, you ought not be so mean. you ought give your brother some of the chocolates. But this doesn't mean that the younger brother now has a right to the chocolates just because someone, thinks that he morally ought to share his chocolates. If the older brother refuses to share his chocolates, he's, being greedy, stingy, and callous, but he's definitely not being unjust towards his brother. So another way of, thinking about a right to rights is, so the fact that A ought to do a thing for B, it follows that B has a right against A that A do it for B. Man, all these dogs. So the implication is that a right is something that depends on how easy it is to provide for him. But Thomson's going to think this is unacceptable, which makes sense. So, consider again to the Henry Fonda example. But now in this, revised Henry Fonda example, he's just across the room. He's in the same room as you, and he just has to walk across the room. It would be nice of him to do that. He's probably morally obligated to do it. But it would be indecent of him not to do it. But that does not mean that I have a right to it, and it would not be unjust if he chose to refuse. She has so it's absurd to think that she has a right when it's easy, and she has no right when it's hard. Rights aren't the kind of thing that come and go like that. It's not the kind of thing we gain or lose the closer or further we are from a person. Rights aren't the kind of things that should, disappear or reappear the harder and harder they become to grant to someone. So even though we ought to let the violinist use our body for that 1 hour, it doesn't justify that the violinist has a right to our body. If we don't, we're not treating him unjustly. We are more like the boy who won't share his box of chocolates. He's going to be greedy, stingy, callous, and cold, but he's not going to be unjust. The same as, in the world where pregnancy only lasts an hour, the same is happening in the woman who wants to have an abortion due to rape. It would seem to be unjust in that circumstance. Now, the unborn child does not have a right just because the woman ought to. So, I'm not quite sure I totally agree with this part here, that the woman who were to get an abortion due to rape is going to be, stingy, callous, or cold. Maybe she has other justifications for getting the abortion rather than it's, inconvenient for this hour. Maybe it's that the rape was so violent that she, doesn't want a reminder of something like that. There seem to be other justifications going on here. But so just from right here, just from the rights situation, maybe she doesn't have a right to, but maybe there are other reasons that would justify an abortion in situations of rape. Okay. So however right is going to be understood, it seems like we could just continue to generate another analogous case. So one, where you're not morally obligated to allow the violinist to use your kidneys. Two, he does not, have a right to use them. And three, you're not acting unjustly by refusing. And then we could also just make the same analogous case for pregnancy. So, however right is going to be understood, it seems like we can just keep generating these same cases and these same examples to make pregnancy going to be analogous. So from this, she's going to conclude that no one is morally required to make large sacrifices of health or all other interests and concerns of all other duties or commitments for 9 months just to keep another person alive. So this is going to be her main conclusion. Boom, right there. Now we're still going to have a few more pages of notes to go over, but that's it. The rest of this is going to be following action. That's her argument right there. It's her conclusion right there. So next we're going to look at the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is going to come from the Gospel. Specifically, it comes from so the Bible. So Luke chapter 10, verse 30 through 35. So a man is, coming from Jerusalem to Jericho, and along the way he is, jumped by a bunch of thieves, and he's robbed and beaten up, and he's left within, a half inch of his life. And then, comes down the street, a priest, and the priest sees him, and he's like, oh, I don't want to deal with that, so he goes on the other side of the road. And then a Levite, who's also a part of the priest class, I believe, in ancient times, or in these times at least, does the same thing. He sees the same guy and he's like, oh, I'm going to cross on the other side of the street. I don't want to deal with that. But then a Samaritan, someone who was usually considered an outsider, someone who, was not well liked. This is the person who sees someone dying on the side of the street, and that's the person who's filled with compassion. They, heal their wounds. They, try and bandage them up, and they even take him to a hotel or an inn, I guess back then. And he says, hey, take care of this guy. I'll be back in 3 days, and I'll pay for whatever he does then. Okay, so that's the story of the Good Samaritan from the Bible, or my brief summary of it. But the Samaritan is doing something that we will call supererogatory. They're going above and beyond what was required of them. So not everyone's going to be required to be good Samaritans, but maybe we're at least required to be minimally decent Samaritans, which the priests and the Levite definitely weren't in this story. They were moral monsters. They were very selfish. I mean, maybe they were in a busy rush to go do something else, but seeing a dying person on the side of the street seems like a pretty moral obligation to go and help that person. So yeah, there's going to be a big difference between the Good Samaritan and what the priests did, which was not even the minimally decent thing to do. So she appeals to this, case, this famous case called the Kitty Genevieve case. It happened in New York, 60s, 70s maybe, I'm not quite sure. It was probably around the time when she was writing this article. And so what happened was Kitty Genevieve was in New York and she was being attacked. She was being hit. She was screaming, calling out for help. I believe she was also raped, and then she ultimately ended up dying. So allegedly, the next day, the New York Post, one of the New York newspapers, reported that 38 people heard the Kitty Genevieve scream of horror and reported that no one did anything. And so Thomson's going to say these people are just like the priest and the Levi who walks by, the person dying on the side of the street. They're going to be moral monsters. The minimally decent person would have at least called the police. So this is a classic telling of the Kitty Genevieve case. This is, now we know it's false. Most people did actually call the police. Most people are minimally decent people. I think that night the police got something like 20 calls about the Kitty Genevieve screams at least, and those were like 20 confirmed calls, so they might have even gotten more. So the idea is like, look, we are normally minimally decent people. So Jesus might, in the Gospels, Jesus might have been talking about encouraging people to be good Samaritans, encouraging people to go above and beyond. But what we see in the Kitty Genevieve case, the real life situation, it's like, we're just asking people not to be moral monsters, not to completely ignore someone else's humanity or what's, happening in the background. And so that seems to be like the standard that we should have in our everyday life, so we're not required to be good Samaritans, but maybe we should be required at least to be like, minimally decent Samaritans. So being a minimally decent Samaritan, I'm not sure it's going to require that a person give up long stretches of their life just to sustain another person's life. Just like the violinist instance, just because it would be nice of you to stay plugged in for 9 months, it doesn't seem like you're morally obligated to do that. So then she points out that no laws are going to compel anyone, specifically no men, to be good Samaritans, let alone minimally decent Samaritans. In contrast, there seem to be some laws specifically surrounding reproductive control of their bodies and rights that are going to compel women to be more than minimally decent Samaritans. Again, carrying a baby to term is going to be above, if you didn't want the baby, is going to be above and beyond what is required of you, according to Thomson here. So these laws aren't really going to tell us much because, again, morality and the law are going to be separate things, but maybe we should have laws that compel people to be at least minimally decent citizens, minimally decent Samaritans. But really, this is just going to show like there's a gross injustice in the law, not only between how different laws are working, but then also how the law is being applied to women and how the law is being applied to men. And then also she's going to say, look, states that are working on making abortion illegal, like Texas and Mississippi currently, they should also be working on minimally decent Samaritan laws, or else they're going to be, making these laws in bad faith, or, their laws are going to be inconsistent. So minimally decent laws are one thing, and, good Samaritan laws are another thing. And she's just saying that, we're not really required to be good Samaritans in our everyday life. Like that, if her conclusion's correct, then that's what she's saying. We're not required to be everyday Samaritans, everyday good Samaritans. We're at least just, not going to be moral monsters. Okay, So let's go back to third-party interventions. Can the doctor help you out? So, think again to the situation where you're stuck in a situation and you can't help yourself out. Then someone comes along who can help you out. It seems like at least the good Samaritan is someone who would help you out in that situation. But yeah, so let's think back to the violinist case. You'd be a good Samaritan to stay plugged in, but you're definitely not required to. And the violinist does not have a right to use your body. And since they don't have a right to use your body, it would not be unjust for someone else to help you unplug yourself from the violinist. And so this is going to be the same thing as, the third party, the doctor. It's not going to be unjust for the doctor to help you out of your situation, to unplug you from the fetus. What's up, poppers? Hey. Oh, wow, you can actually see the Channel Islands from here too. Maybe I should have done it this way. Oh man, I'm surrounded by so many dogs right now. So she's been arguing that just because the fetus has a right to life, it does not establish the impermissibility of abortion. But maybe she has been looking at the wrong arguments. Maybe a woman has a special kind of responsibility because of the relationship between the parent and the child. Parents have a responsibility to take care of their children. But as she argued in section 4, the causal responsibility does not imply this special responsibility, unless you've assumed it explicitly or implicitly. So the fact that the parents, have taken on responsibility because they bring home the child and they're assuming this responsibility. Like the fact that they didn't put the child up for adoption should be taken as a sign that they are assuming this responsibility. If the mother and father, had taken all reasonable precautions against having children, then they have not taken on the special responsibility just in virtue of being biologically related to them. Okay, so there are going to be two main reasons people might not be happy. So we've been talking, I said at the end of a few sections ago, that was her main conclusion, and then she did some other extra considerations, further implications, and then that last section she was talking about this possible objection, and these are going to be two possible objections. People still might possibly object to her view. They might not agree with her conclusion for two reasons. So one is that she's not really giving a clear answer to the permissibility of abortion, yes or no. There are situations where it's clearly permissible, like a frightened, sick, desperate 14-year-old who was pregnant due to rape. Like, of course, abortion seems to be permissible in that situation. But there are also cases, where carrying the baby to term only requires the mother to be minimally decent. So think about a late-term abortion because she forgot about a trip that she was planning abroad. It seems like that would be a moral monster. It's like, she is pregnant, she's financially stable, and she planned this trip abroad, and then she forgot about it, and she's like, oh, okay, well, the trip includes, I already paid for the drink package, and I don't want to waste that, so I'm going to abort my 7-month fetus that I intentionally brought into this world, just so that way I can enjoy my vacation that I prepaid for and forgot about. It's like, whoa, that person is definitely, that abortion seems very immoral and impermissible in that circumstance. So she's not going to say, look, all abortions are permissible. There are certain abortions that seem to, a moral monster. Another instance I like to think about is so are you allowed to get an abortion for any reason? It's like, well, maybe not. But, so what about a woman who, just gets a thrill out of the idea of, killing a human being? And if you're going to grant that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception, then, she's going to go out and intentionally get pregnant, maybe even deceive a guy to get her pregnant, so that way she can go to the abortion clinic and get off on this idea of murdering a human being. It's like, whoa, that's definitely a morally wrong reason to get an abortion. So, those are moral monsters. And so not every abortion, is going to be done by people like that. There's obviously, as I was saying, the sick 14-year-old who was pregnant due to rape. It's like that person, abortion seems to be morally permissible. Now, the other person, doesn't seem to be morally permissible. That person seems to be a moral monster. So all she's saying is like, we should have this standard of being morally decent people, and that's the standard we shouldn't be falling below. Okay, so then there's this other objection. People might not be happy with her conclusion for another reason. So there's a difference between the permissibility of abortion and the right to secure the death of the unborn child. So imagine you're attached to the violinist and you detach yourself, and by some miracle he lives. Maybe they misread the stuff, or something went right, I guess, and he survives. You don't have a right now to kill him. Like, that makes sense. And the same thing seems to happen if a child happens to survive outside the mother's uterus. It doesn't seem like she has the right to kill that fetus. I mean, I guess if it's living outside the person at that point, it's no longer a fetus. It's definitely a person at that point, right? The woman might not like the idea of, her offspring being out in the world, but that doesn't really give her the right to, kill the child if it survives outside of her. Okay, so the whole time we've just been, granting for assumption that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception, and still saying, look, there are some abortions that are morally permissible. She's even going to say, like, an abortion where you were, reasonably trying to protect yourself, and you still got pregnant anyway, like in consensual sex, like that is going to be morally permissible. But not all abortions are going to be morally permissible. So even though, we are granting this idea that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception, we can still say that abortion is permissible. But a fetus it doesn't seem reasonable to think that it's a full person from the moment of conception. It's just a clump of cells. It's a single-celled organism. It's like, how could that be a person? It's, the acorn to oak tree argument again. It's even clearer then that abortion should be permissible. All right, so that's it. That's the end of my notes. This is Thomson's article. This is, I think, one of the best, well thought through arguments about abortion. And I think it gives us a reasonable conclusion. It doesn't push us to either extreme view that abortions are always permissible or abortions are not permissible. It gives us clear circumstances, like, did the mother give the fetus a right to use her body? If so, then it would be unjust, and she would be treating the fetus unjustly to, do that, and it would be indecent of her to do that. But she still, has a right to do that. We, live in a society where it's okay to be an indecent human being, sadly. Okay. So yeah, I just want you guys to think about, so she gave us a lot of arguments by analogy, and I want you guys to come to class thinking about those arguments by analogy. How do they, or were they convincing? Which ones were convincing? Which ones weren't convincing, and why? All right, I'll see you guys in class.